All right, looks like we got a couple extra folks here dropping in. I'm sure there'll be other folks as well joining us here in the next few minutes at least. What we're going to do for this afternoon is run through a quick presentation of the AFWERX STTR program, how we are different from the SBIR program, and the requisite details and everything for the upcoming solicitation, and move pretty quickly into a Q&A. That's really the biggest piece of these, is the biggest kind of value statement to you all at this, in this time frame, is to make sure that you guys are clear on our program and we can answer any questions that you all have directly. So without too much more ado, we'll go ahead and get into the presentation itself. All right. Can everybody see that screen there?
Yes.
Cool, perfect, thank you so much. All right, so we'll go back a little bit here. Again, we're here to talk about the AFWERX open topic, STTR. We'll have a quick presentation here and move into the Q&A. Couple things to note up front is this X in front of the 20.A. So one of the things I was even guilty of up front was clicking, when you go to the DoD submission website, clicking on the 20.A and being confused as to why our instructions, or the instructions that are in there, not being for AFWERX. And there's actually another green button, if you will, down the screen that starts with the X, and that'll point you in the right direction. So we'll touch on that a little bit later on as well. As always, these are being recorded. These Zoom meetings and the AMAs are being recorded and will be available later on our website. We're able to do these kind of engagement activities during the solicitation period because of the recording capability and our ability to make these public afterwards. Some great resources for you, and we'll touch on this in the upfront and then at the end as well. Some great resources with regards to the solicitations, the instructions, submission portal, walkthroughs, tutorials, etc. So feel free to take a screenshot of those for later reference. All right. So the STTR, and specifically the AFWERX STTR, is here to commercialize dual-use research, right? There's more words here on the screen, obviously, to kind of describe that in more detail, but that's really what we're here to do. Specifically, our intent and value proposition to you all is to facilitate meaningful engagement with Air Force users and users across the federal marketplace, ultimately to be able to leverage the DoD funding, and really, to be honest, all federal government funding, to help buy down your technology risk and ultimately foster commercial success for you and your product. Just one nuance here in the parlance that we tend to use. You'll notice that we don't say grant at any point in time, and that's because we are awarding government contracts, vice grants, and we want to make sure that we touch on that distinction up front, especially with STTR. That tends to work more with the folks in the research and academia space. So we want to make sure we use that terminology moving forward. All right, so for those of you who are not familiar with the STTR program, it's very similar to SBIR. We'll touch on some of the differences later on. One of those similarities is the fact that it's a federal government program written into U.S. code. For STTR specifically, DoD is one of 5 participating agencies. Obviously, the Air Force is a subset of that. And ultimately, what we're trying to do through the program is support scientific excellence and technology innovation through federal research funding. Our most important role is to bridge that gap between grants and the university kind of ecosystem, if you will, the research ecosystem, and the consumer and federal marketplace and actual commercialization. You'll notice some of the differences that we touch on later on speak to that bridging specifically, in how folks that are currently in that academic and research ecosystem can lean forward and ultimately be successful in the consumer marketplace as well. One common question that we get is that we talk about research institutions specifically, and I pulled out the longer definition here from our policy directive. The source there at the bottom is a great resource for you all. Is, you know, what we base a lot of our policy policy within AFWERX off of when it comes to this program. It's not a secret document. You can Google it and see this, the rules that we have to live by. And again, we're the source of a lot of the policy on our end. So the big things we want to highlight here is that a research institution does not always necessarily have to be a university. That's certainly the most common, historically common avenue for teams to partner with, but it can be a nonprofit institution that's owned and operated exclusively for scientific or educational purposes, right? And you can read the rest of the words there, but that opens up many different things, whether it be entrepreneurship centers or other type of accelerators or incubators, right? It doesn't have to be a state university institution. Also, it can be a federally funded research and development center, an FFRDC, right? Something along like Sandia Labs, or there's a whole wide variety of those that will qualify as a research institution. And on the last line there, it can also include hospital and military educational institutions, provided they meet the definition above. So again, research institution is most commonly understood to be universities, but it doesn't have to be a university. You have a fairly wide aperture as far as what can be your partner as far as an organization goes. As far as the traditional Air Force program structure, right? And you can go into the DoD portal and you'll see instructions from a variety of folks. There's a screenshot there in about the middle left. There's DoD instructions, and you also see instructions for different services, whether it be the Air Force, the Navy, so on and so forth, right? I included a kind of a snippet there from the Navy solicitation this go around from 20.A, and you'll notice that traditionally speaking, right, the topics that are in there are fairly specific, right? Machine learning tools to optimize metal additive manufacturing and so on, right? That's one of the differences here that we'll highlight with the Air Force open topic, is that it's just that, it's open, right? It includes anything that you think could be of potential use to the government and the Air Force more specifically. When you first go onto the DoD submission website, you're going to notice that there's a kind of a alphabet soup of solicitation. There's kind of a key there that's on the slide to kind of help you decode what is being spoken about. And you'll notice it kind of, there's examples there on the Navy snippet, and then our topic number, specifically. A couple things that are different that you'll notice is not only the X up front that we talked about a little earlier, but the CSO there in that last section. Those speak to the difference between that requirements-based solicitation, that broad agency announcement, or BAA, that is reflected there in the Navy topic, for instance, right? Those are confined to 3,600 funds. That is Air Force procurement or procurement appropriation categories for our research and development. So 3,600 funds are Air Force research and development funding, right? And those BAAs are confined to that type of funding, right? And that'll be important later on when we talk about the phase 2 matching. With the Air Force open topic, we are not confined to that 3,600 R&D funding. We are open to any kind of funding to include that research, that R&D, but also to operational funds and other things that can be other funding that can be matched later on in phase 2. We'll come back to that a little bit later, but I want to make sure we highlight that up front. And that key can be very convenient in helping kind of decode some of those topic numbers. But, traditionally speaking, the STTR program structure is a one-to-one pairing model, right? You have one sponsoring organization, one in the Navy case, one naval organization in particular, sponsor that topic, each of those topics, right? Which are fairly specific questions, right? that one-to-one pairing model does not kind of help itself out in terms of encouraging wide, broad engagement. And it kind of reinforces the information silos and the organizational equities. So when small businesses solicit and actually respond to those individual topic numbers, you know, they're working with that one Navy organization that sponsored that topic, right? Also, when you talk about timelines in that second bullet there, and even at the graphic there at the bottom, the solicitation and evaluation can take up to 6, 7+ months, which is a long time, especially for small businesses, right? It's a long time to put in work and then wait for some kind of result, right? Also, we talked about the BAA, that broad agency announcements being confined to R&D dollars, right? The contract vehicles don't always allow you to work directly with the operational communities of the Department of Defense, right? And so what you end up having is small businesses who are essentially transferring R&D work back and forth to other R&D entities inside of DoD, which can be okay. But for many folks, especially for those who are really chasing commercialization and are looking for an operational end user, they're looking for ways to get out of the R&D space and into customers' hands, if you will. Ultimately, that one-to-one pairing model we talked about in the first bullet there is kind of relies on the government's motivation, whether it be the timelines, whether it be specifying the topics up front, and us as a government having to ask the right questions in order for those small businesses in the public space to come and engage with the Department of Defense. Our focus here with the AFWERX program is transitioning technology to the warfighter, not lateral R&D transition, and not, you know, something that relies on us to ask the right question, right? What we've done here with the open topic is really institute some basic consumer economics to the government business model, right? So instead of going from a requirements-based model, that BAA, right, we're going to a system that relies on the demand of the Air Force operational user, not just the R&D communities, but the entirety of the Air Force, right? Or in the entirety of the DoD as well. Instead of going from instead of having a 6+ month solicitation to award timeframe, right? You go from the end of solicitation period to having an award contract in your hand no later than 30 days afterwards. Instead of requiring deep technical requirements from you, right? We're moving to a 25-slide technical volume, right? So you still have to register as a small business. You still have to meet the basic eligibility requirements in terms of the research institution and everything else. But as far as the technical requirements, you're not writing a 50, 100-page paper, right, to get into the program 6 or 7 months ahead of time, right? We're looking for a 25-slide technical volume that demonstrates that you know where you're going and what you need to do to commercialize your technology. Also, there's limited to small business exposure. You know, the open topic, as I mentioned, is open. It's open to any compelling IP or solution that you think has an application in the government, right? And we always talk about kind of the iceberg analogy. When you think of the Department of Defense and the federal government writ large, you tend to think of military-specific equipment or government-specific equipment. And they don't always think about the international system of cities and towns that we have in our base systems that require, you know, basic logistics, basic management, right? Scheduling of all types and sorts, and all of the infrastructure that goes along with that. Ultimately, as I mentioned before, we go from a government-driven model that relies on government motivation and government processes to a business and user-driven model that allows you all as the motivated parties and motivated small businesses to interact directly and engage directly with the motivated end users who need your technology, right? What AFWERX is doing here is setting up a structure in which you can engage with those government market, that government market and the government stakeholders. We don't want to get in your way. We want to facilitate that engagement. Ultimately, AFWERX is not going to be the ones buying your technology, right? We're merely, like I said, facilitating that interaction. So, as we talked about before, It's a three-phase program that hinges initially on customer and application discovery. It moves into a phase 2 with the prototype development, and eventually into a phase 3. And we want to talk about each of those along the way. This phase 1 is 3 months, 50K. There's no matching scheme for this phase 1. They're pretty straightforward and standard across the board, whether that be STTR or SBAR. They're very similar in expectations, and they're exactly the same in terms of period of performance and award. As you move into the phase 2, you have 2 different options, right? You have the rapid option, which takes advantage of our matching scheme. And there's also a traditional option that is a small or lesser period of performance and a lesser award as well. And the difference between the two is the requirement for the rapid to have a interest from a government customer. One clarification that we've been asked to make here in some of the previous AMAs is to understand for the matching funds, that is the funding that you get from the DoD organizations or federal government organizations, is matched 4-to-1, and private investment from unaffiliated private investors, right? It could be Y Combinator or even crowdfunding in some cases. We match that 2-to-1. And in order to move from a phase 1 to a phase 2 rapid specifically, you need to have stated interest in the form of an MOU from a DoD and hopefully Air Force partner, right? For a phase 2, we still maintain a path for those who are not able to find that DoD customer in 3 months, but obviously it's to a lesser degree. So that's where you get the smaller period of performance and the smaller contract award. Ultimately, where we're trying to go is transition, right? That phase 3. And phase 3 makes it sound very similar to phase 1 and phase 2, but it's actually a very different animal. So phase 3 is a sole source procurement that's funded solely through that Air Force, DoD, or federal government customer. It doesn't have to be in the Air Force specifically, right? AFWERX is not the intermediary for that phase 3 contract, and there's no time or funding constraints. So AFWERX kind of developed the system for the phase 1 and phase 2 so that you can get to a phase 3 as quickly as is best for your business, right? I want to touch on that sole source procurement. So for those who may not be familiar, a sole source justification, which is what this program results in, is the legal basis for an Air Force or federal government customer, again, to go to their local contracting shop and buy your product from you directly. And the big thing there is that we through the program satisfy the federal requirement to compete for the acquisitions and the procurement. What that means is they don't have to do that in a phase 3. So normally what would happen if an Air Force member or Air Force organization wanted to buy your product, they would have to go develop a requirement, develop all the documentation, go and solicit and compete all the different, all your requirements out in the public space. There would have to be some form of a source selection, right? And ultimately they'd be able to buy it, right? But the difference is that Air Force customer would have to go through all that work and time, which can be over a year easily, to buy that thing from you. With that sole source justification that you get through this program, they can skip through that, right? They satisfied that requirement up front through the program, and now they can come directly to you and buy things from you directly. So that's a huge thing that is valuable, not only in the Air Force, but for the entirety of the federal government as well. Can take advantage of this. And that's one of the benefits of this being written into US code, into actual statute, right? This is not an Air Force program. This is not Air Force policy. This is no kidding in law. So another detail I wanted to touch on this is that with the STTR program, it kind of looks like an iron pipe. You go from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3. There are options to kind of branch out between the STTR and SBIR programs. So you can go into an STTR phase 1 and move into an SBIR phase 2 if that makes most sense for your business, right? One of the things that we want to give to you as small businesses is options as you move through the system, right? Not every business is the same. Not every industry is the same. Some take extra, some longer development, and that's okay. We want to make sure that we give you options to take care of the needs of your business. Ultimately, we do want to move you through the system and get you towards that phase 3 contract where the federal government folks can buy and procure your things directly from you. All right. So for this solicitation specifically, X20.A, right? First of all, it's the first commercial solutions offering in STTR history, right? STTR has been around since like 1992, and so we're closing in on 30 years of that broad agency announcement kind of structure, right? This is the first time that CSO has been offered, and what it does, as I mentioned earlier, is that it allows not only R&D customers to be interested and contribute to your project, but also operational users as well. So if you're familiar with Air Force appropriation categories, 3,400 or operations and maintenance dollars can be put towards this, as well as any other type as well. So it's a big deal, and it opens up your aperture exponentially as in the terms of who you can engage with and who can engage with you, right? We've also doubled the phase 1 awards from 25K to 50K up front in phase 1. And we've increased that rapid phase 2 program up to 500K from 300K. So it's now, that's 500K of AFWERX dollars. In the case where an Air Force organization wanted to give you 125K, AFWERX would match that 500K. So now you as a small business have 625K to work on that Air Force customer's application, right? Likewise, if you had, to use the 2-to-1 private matching scheme, if a private entity or multiple private entities contributed 250K, that would maximize our AFWERX 500K, and you would still move through the process with your Air Force customer that you found in phase 1. Now with 750K total dollars towards that application. So the Air Force matching piece is one part of your phase 2 rapid contribution or effort value, if you will, all for that Air Force application. So it's a force multiplier. Also, we've updated our phase 1 tech volume requirements. So we've axed the tech paper mandatory, or the mandatory tech paper. You can still have a 5-page tech paper attached if you so choose, but we have made that optional and moved everything into the slides, right? And again, we'll talk about the grading criteria later on, but those 25 slides are really for you to demonstrate to us your knowledge, not only of your technology, but of your opportunity and the value proposition that you're giving to that prospective Air Force customer. Later on this year, we're looking to do a number of other initiatives. We're working closely with AFRL's Quantum Topic that is currently on the street. They have a number of events coming up later in the year, and the folks that are in part of our topic will also, the relevant folks who are in our topic will also be invited to the Quantum Topic and be involved in that initiative as well. Ultimately, we're all on the same team, right? Just because we have one topic doesn't mean that we're not talking across. Also, obviously, with the advent and the standing up of the U.S. Space Force here just a couple of months ago, we are working very closely with our what previously was known as Space Command and developing a number of solutions for them as well. So if you're looking to get in on the ground floor as far as Space Force is concerned, this is a great way to do that. Also moving forward, we're tailoring development of the focus areas and the pitch day integration for these STTR. Historically, this has been pretty heavily SBIR, and we're looking to move many more of our STTR companies into that space as well and get you in front of those Air Force users. We're looking to move towards an STTR or joint STTR topic and facilitate broader engagement and impact across the services, not just necessarily in the Air Force. And then, as always, every iteration we talked about in the major header at the front of the slide, every iteration, we're doing a number of updates to our incentive structures and policies and everything, and to make sure that we're providing the most value possible to you as small businesses, as well as our Air Force and DoD customers as well. So one thing we want to touch on also in terms of data rights is kind of an interesting thing, something that everybody's interested in, is that mid last year, we have moved to a 20-year protection period for data rights protections. And this is across both SBIR and STTR. What that allows you to do is that instead of having previously a 4-year protection period, where the DoD would protect your commercial IP for 4 years, right? We've bumped that up to 20 years, right? So we can have more discussion on that. And there's a great resource at cyber.gov for you to use as well that can kind of walk you through the process if you have more detailed questions. But obviously, across STTR, the baseline of eligibility for you to apply, one, you must be an eligible small business and registered as such in terms of incorporation, DUNS number, SAM number, cage code, that kind of stuff. You must partner with an eligible research institution that we talked about before. You, as a small business, must complete at least 40% of the proposed work in terms of total dollars or the number of hours proposed. And you know, on a similar line of thought, the research institution must also complete at least 30% of the work by those same metrics. Also, one thing to keep in mind is that the principal investigator, the PI, must be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident and have their green card, for instance. We've moved to a new submission portal across the Department of Defense. I know there are a number of folks who are having issues with that currently, so we are working through options for that to be able to take those submissions via email or through the submission portal. So we can have more discussion on that as well. Ultimately, for this X20.A solicitation, they are due on 12 February at 8 p.m. Eastern. As we mentioned, you got to have the baseline eligibility requirements, meet the baseline eligibility requirements, and send in your 25-slide tech volume. Ultimately, those proposals will be evaluated on three main technical criteria. One is the technical risk, right? Obviously, here, the more mature, the better, right? We want to make sure you can start with something as simple as an idea, but you need to really kind of iron out how you're going to get to where you need to go in terms of developing a commercial product, right? And the question here, the issue here is not always how you're going to do it, but the time it takes to do it in. So we talked through the time frames, 3 months up front to find that customer, and up to 15 months during a phase 2. And so you really kind of have to have a streamlined way to demonstrate how you're going to get from point A to point B. Secondly, we evaluate the team, not only to conduct the research and development that is necessary to do that commercialization, but also the marketing and the business side as well, right? And we all know that ultimately these are not always the same two people, right? The same two sets of folks, but you need to at least speak to both sides of that equation, right? It can't all be R&D work in order to commercialize. It takes both sides. Commercialization, right? What you're doing here is really kind of demonstrating a commercialization plan, whether that be understanding your prospective market, user, application, talking and kind of the market research, if you will, in terms of finding your customer. You know, it's one thing to say that, you know, it's applicable to the entire Air Force. That doesn't really demonstrate that you know who you're looking for, right? You need to drill down and say, hey, in this particular DoD application, you know, we will have some really firm stakeholders. As we mentioned there, 10 passionate people is better than the faceless masses. Also, one way to kind of help your case, if you will, in terms of commercialization is any external work with development programs, whether it be incubators, accelerators. We talked about like Y Combinator, for instance, that kind of help you through that process and help you think through where you need to be on certain parts of that. Obviously, investment and other interest also speaks to the commercialization and the focus and overall interest in your product. All right. Another highlight here for the submission portal training, that the training portals or the training webinars have already happened, but they do have some fairly decent instructions, as I understand, for that new training portal. If you have not looked at it, I would encourage you to not wait, and ultimately not wait till the last minute. All right, and that kind of brings us to our Q&A here. As I mentioned, this entirety, this whole video will be recorded and posted to our STTR website. These resources are the same that we posted up front, but yet another, this is another opportunity for you to screenshot or record those for your reference later on. So I'm showing 33 after. I want to make sure that we go to and address any questions via the chat. For those who are not familiar, with Zoom, there's a chat feature here, and you can type questions in and we will be able to answer here for everyone. So if you have some, go ahead and feel free to go ahead and type those in. I'm not currently showing any questions. To address. So it looks like we grew by a few folks. Currently have 14 on the line. Also on the STTR website, we have a sample 25 slide tech volume template that you can use to help guide your submission. You'll note that the template itself is not actually 25 slides long, right? We give you some of the bare bones, and if you need space to expound on a particular subject, you have a slide or two to do that with. You'll also notice that some of the slides in there are as applicable, so there's ways you can kind of buy space that way as well. Mikey, you're welcome. He says, thank you for walking through everything, running the link. Though I don't think it's up on the website yet, I do expect to do another AMA next week. So if you guys think of new questions, we will certainly address those during next week's AMA as well. So feel free to jump in there. So a quick question from Casey here. Could you explain the time frame for commercialization again? So yeah, I will go back actually to this slide here. Kind of walks through. So generically, we go from a phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3. As I mentioned, you can certainly go through it in that order. You can also branch out between STTR and SBIR programs, but for the STTR pipeline, for lack of a better term, you go to phase 3, that's 3 months, and the focus here is to find those applications and find your stakeholders in the Air Force and across DoD as well, right? We will match DoD dollars as well during phase 2. In short, in layman's terms, phase 1 is to find someone who cares about your solution. That's it. Find folks who care, right? During the evaluation, the phase 1 proposal evaluation, we want to, we're screening based on a few criteria that we talked about, but phase 1 is really your chance to get out there, find stakeholders, find those people that you think exist, with the legal basis that we give to you, both you as a small business on contract and also the Air Force and DoD users, and you move into that phase 2. So there, as I mentioned before, there's 2 flavors of phase 2. There's a 9-month period of performance with 100K. And to move into that traditional, you do not need an MOU from a DoD user. but you do for a phase 2. And the phase 2 is where things really get interesting and really opportunities really start opening up for you. You'll notice there's a 15-month period of performance and up to, or 500K plus in total funding. And you get into our matching scheme, 4-to-1 government and 2-to-1 private, which are more than what you'll see in the SBIR world. And from there, you can move into the phase 3, which is the direct procurement from the Air Force or DoD user. So you can go, technically speaking, from a phase 1 to phase 3 if you have something that, you know, if you can find that user and convince them that they need to buy your thing, then you can move straight from a phase 1 to phase 3, right? If 3 months is all it takes for you to do that, then, you know, more power to you. We don't want to hold you back, right? Generically, though, it takes, generally speaking, it takes longer to do that, go through that process. So again, there's a number of different options, whether it be SBIR, as the traditional phase 2, or the rapid phase 2. So in terms of a year through the traditional pipeline, or a year and a half, 18 months total, to move from a phase 1 through the rapid phase 2 and into transition. So those timelines speak directly to the fact that, you know, our program is focused much more on commercialization as opposed to the R&D kind of turning the crank in terms of technology goes. Okay. I'm gonna go back over here to the questions. Can you copy and paste the link of the slide template? I can. It's also publicly posted and available on the STTR website. So if you go to the AFWERX website, navigate to the STTR page, and it is down in the phase 1 resources. But yes, I'll take a moment here in just a minute and I will paste the link for you. All right, next question is the 40-30 ratio meant by either money or hours or both? So I think what you're looking for there is for the eligibility criteria. So the small business has to do at least 40% of the work, and the research institution has to do at least 30% of the work. And both of those baseline eligibility criteria are in terms of either total dollar amount or hours. So you can pick one, or it could be both, right? That would also satisfy the requirement. But the requirement is for one or the other. Okay, answer that question. Patrick, so you mentioned that it's better to have some passionate people interested. What is the best way to engage with the DoD on finding which users will benefit from the technology, to put it in the 25 slides? So, you know, we put that customer discovery, that prior customer discovery, pre-phase 1 customer discovery on you all, right? Whether it be LinkedIn or Google or your own research, right? We're not necessarily looking for individuals, right? Or individual organizations to be in your proposal. That's always nice, right? You may have connections and may know those people already, and that's great. But that doesn't have to be the case, right? You can describe your user, you can describe their application to the best of your knowledge, right? The point is, we want you to demonstrate kind of your knowledge of the customer, right? To the best of your ability. So you don't necessarily have to have an individual lined out with a phone number and email address, right? You can have an organization. You can have a type of organization. You can say, hey, you know, I don't know, civil engineering will be able to use this for X, Y, or Z. So it kind of depends on your particular application and your knowledge of the process. But prior to the actual phase 1 contract, where we kind of help give you some of those resources, we want you guys to utilize whatever resources that you have at your disposal to help answer that question and get you as far along in the process as possible. Great question from Casey. So, you know, the R&D space is not US centric, right? There's lots of international involvement as well, whether it be international students at your research institution or potentially working on your project, and we can speak more to that as well, or the research and development itself coming from other places. So the rule is, well, there's a few in regards to this. One, the small business has to be US based. So that doesn't necessarily speak to where the technology is from, but where the small business is from and where they primarily do business. The research entity also has to do the same thing. So the research entity, whoever it is, needs to be US based. Back to the small business requirements, has to be at least 50% US owned. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. There are also rules for who can work on the project. H-1B visas, international student visas, are permissible in very specific cases, right? So it's not just a blanket H-1B is okay. They have to be working on something that is directly applicable, like clearly applicable to their studies. And again, this speaks back to that question earlier in terms of 40% for the small business and 30% for the university. So if you have or intend for students to work on, graduate students, postdocs, whatever, to work on your project, and you're trying to use their labor as being underneath or being a part of the small business labor, they need to be employed by your small business, right? And that's, that's for the benefit of them as students and or employees, and the research institution as well. So it can't simply be a pass-through for small business to use kind of cheap labor, if you will, through students. That's an important piece. We've come across that before, so I want to make sure that's clear. One thing I didn't highlight, I think, on the STTR specifics and how we compare to SBIR is not only do you have to have the research institution included, but the primary investigator, the principal investigator, the PI, can be employed primarily at the small business, which is similar to SBIR, but they can also be primarily employed at the research institution. So you can have a tenured professor technically be a small business owner, but be principally employed at the university or whatever research institution, and that's okay. That counts. That's a special caveat for STTR program specifically. Also, one of the big places where STTR plays is the fact that you don't need a commercialized product to go through to start our program, right? With SBIR, you have to have a commercially available product, right? That you're going to tweak, if you will, or adjust for a DoD application, right? You can go through this STTR program and be successful without a commercially available product up front, right? You can have a concept, you can have some, some kind of idea, and still get into the pipeline. So that's a huge value proposition in terms of the STTR program specifically versus the SBIR program. So Casey, in regards to your technology origination question, we kind of talked around it a little bit. There are no requirements for the technology itself to be US based, but the research institution and the small business have to be US based. So that kind of answers your question. We don't have any policy in regards to where the technology originates from. So I hope that helps answer your question. What other questions do we have? Kind of gotten to the end of the list here. Give other clarifications that I can help with. Certainly want to do that. We talked through the matching funds for the rapid phase 2, right? What we're trying to do is incentivize a broader scope of interest. So we certainly want Air Force interest. We certainly want DoD and federal government interest. And we also want private interest as well. These are all indications that stakeholders are actively involved in the development of your program and actively interested in what you have to produce. right? So we talked about the matching funding. So you'll notice I didn't say Air Force. I don't believe I said Air Force matching funding, right? That can be DoD or federal government funding. It doesn't have to be specifically Air Force. So if you find prospective customers in NASA, for instance, we can take those funds and match those as government funding. So it's at 4 to 1. So there's some, you know, some important details there. Our challenge to you all is that if you find a NASA application, if you find an Army application, our challenge is that you're probably going to be able to find an Air Force application, right? So when we go into the phase 2 prioritization, if you will, and evaluation process, you know, our focus certainly is on those Air Force applications, but we will still match funds from external places. Our challenge, again, is that if you find an application somewhere else in the federal government, the Air Force is probably going to have something similar as well. So it's an important clarification as well. Okay. Ultimately, we're here for you guys, so we're not gonna waste your time. If you guys don't have any extra questions, we will stay on the line here for a few extra minutes. So if you guys have questions, certainly feel free to type them in, and we will address those individually. If you don't have any questions, thanks so much for tuning in on your Friday afternoon. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Friday. Have a great weekend. And again, we'll be here for the next few minutes if anyone else has any last touches. Thanks, everyone. Check out the STTR website. We'll be posting recordings of this presentation as well as details for next week's AMA. So feel free to jump in there as well. As more people join and have questions, next week we'll actually promote this, the AMAs will probably be a little better. So I anticipate a little bit more engagement and a little bit larger crowd. But today you got a little bit more personalized attention in terms of questions. So it's not all bad. Great question from Kelly. So generally where we post those are up at the top header. So if you go to the STTR website right now, you'll notice there's a couple of links for joining this AMA, for instance. And I anticipate that we'll put links to the recording up there. And we'll also post links not only for last week's, which was a pretty high level brief. It was only 30 minutes long or so. This one will also be linked up there as well, for those who want to watch again. All right. All right, well, I'm showing 51 after. I don't see any more questions. Again, thanks for joining us and tuning in. We'll see you next week if you would like to join us, and we look forward to seeing your proposals. Thanks so much.